Hey, what's up? My name is Alex. I'm with If Studio. You may know me as a guy who answers your questions in our Facebook community. Well, today we would like to introduce you our new series of video tutorials, or rather not tutorials, or something like little documentaries. Documentaries which will be telling the story of how our polyurethane or resin cats are made. That is an interesting and rather complicated process, and we received lots of requests to make these videos, and the footage which you are about to see was actually recorded back in September, and now in mid-December I finally got around to completing the edit. It is not because it is such a complicated and time-consuming process. It's just that with all the huge volume of orders which we receive, we hardly have much time to do something extraneous like video tutorials, which we are happy to do as much as we can, but unfortunately so far we only released 2 of them. Well, this series of video tutorials, which I'm introducing right now, will include 3 videos. 3-part series. The first video, which you are about to see right now, will explain how polyurethane parts are prepared before they are assembled and airbrushed. Obviously, the other 2 videos will explain the airbrushing process and the assembling itself. But since this is not a 3D print, this is molding. Molding is more complicated than 3D printing. The process is quite interesting and rather complicated. So without any further ado, let's get to business.
Alright, here we go. We start the whole process by removing the gates. These little things which are sticking out of the surface are the gates. Originally these were holes through which the material used to flow during the molding process. These are the gates we removed. Now it is time to do some polishing. At first, initially we employ a drill with a special nozzle to do the polishing. We are concentrating on those areas where the gates used to be, because obviously there are now some defects there. And not only that, but we are also using this polishing head to cover up the seam at the back of the cat's head. That's another of the typical molding defects, something you have to be prepared for. Now we are using sponges. Next step of polishing is sponges. We want to make sure that our parts are good and polished, and we start by using a fine sponge, a sponge with a fine surface. Each part has to be polished that way. Now it is time to use superfine sponge. Superfine sponge will help us finish up our polishing process, and we will even use some water as an additional agent which will help us to achieve the result we need. Now we will use some tissue to make sure that the parts are good and dry. Next up is drilling. Drilling is an interesting but complicated and an extremely stressful thing, which also requires quite a bit of experience. Why? Because, you see, unlike 3D printing, where every part arrives to us already with a small delicate holes for the elastic, with resin it is a completely different story. You cannot produce those little holes during the molding process. It is impossible. So you have to add them manually using a drill. And the complexity of the whole thing comes from the fact that even the smallest mistake can mean that you ruined, if not the whole thing, then this particular part for sure. Which means that the part has to be redone, it has to be sent for recasting. Right now, as you can see, we are using a nozzle with a round head to produce these little cavities. These cavities will be used to hide the knots of the elastic. Now, one of the most complicated parts of the drilling of these joints. And the complexity again comes from the fact that not only you have to do the drilling, but you have to do the drilling from 2 ends, and the holes have to meet in one point, and that is extremely complicated. and you have several joints of that sort in every cat. Here you can see these joints. Now the paws. The paws are separated into a different chapter because these little parts require some special attention. As previously, we start by removing the gate. By the way, the part you are looking at right now is not the paw itself, but a joint next to the paw. Nonetheless, the quality of its processing will determine how the paw itself will move. Right now we are using a nozzle with a round head, again to cover up the area where the gate used to be. We can regulate the speed like so. And next up, we will be using a nozzle with a coned head. This nozzle will help us make sure that the opening of the hole inside this joint has correct shape, and that in turn will determine the range of motion of this joint. You have to remember that the whole process of assembling a resin cat is very much different from assembling a 3D printed cat. And that is because the molding process has its limitations. And one of those limitations is that you cannot produce a paw already with a pin in it. The pin which is used to attach a hook which is used to attach an elastic. Therefore, you have to sculpt that pin manually, using a drill again with a special nozzle, like you can see right here. And this process requires lots of precision, and remember, you have to do the whole thing 4 times for each paw. Finally, the tail. As you can imagine, the tail consists of many segments, and here you can see one of them. This is the largest segment. Still pretty small, and we are taking it and we are attaching it to the drill by its gate, and you will see why in a second. We are taking a sponge, and as you can see, this is a potter's wheel principle at work. We are polishing this segment using a drill and a sponge. Next, the gate is already removed, and we are using the drill to polish the area again where the gate used to be. Now we're taking the sponge to finish it up, and now we are using the nozzle with a coned head to make sure that the hole inside this segment has a correct opening. That is very important. That will determine the range of motion of the future tail. It has to be wide enough, otherwise you won't be able to bend the tail at all. Now we're using a regular drill to drill the actual hole for the elastic. And you have to remember that there are many segments in the tail. Here is the largest segment next to the smallest one. And the smallest has to be processed in the similar way. You have to drill a hole right through it, and you have to make sure that the opening of the hole has wide enough shape for the tail to bend. So right now we're finishing up the hole, and now we're using a nozzle with a round head to make sure that the hole has a correct wide opening.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this little video which you just watched, and hopefully now you have some idea how our dolls are produced, namely polyurethane dolls. As you can see, it is a complicated and process which includes several steps, and right now you watched the preparation. Next up, in next video, tutorials or documentaries will show you how the dolls are assembled and airbrushed. We hope that we can release all these videos within a month, hopefully. This little guy here is a polyurethane cat, a resin cat. It is already assembled, obviously, and airbrushed. It looks simple, but hopefully now you understand that each little part, each little element, even the smallest element here, requires some manual attention. And hopefully now you have some idea why polyurethane cats tend to be a little bit more expensive and why they usually take a little bit more time to produce. Like I said, we hope that the other parts of this little video series will be released within a month. I understand that the holidays are approaching, and I wish you Merry Christmas and Happy New Year ahead of time, and I hope to see you soon.